You're standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box under one arm, a stapler, a small potted succulent that somehow survived 4 years of your neglect, a framed photo of your dog, and HR is still talking, has been talking for what feels like 10 minutes now, using the phrase restructuring, so many times it's stopped meaning anything. Her name is Carol. She's not unkind about it. She's just doing a job, the same way you were doing yours 40 minutes ago before a calendar invite titled Quick Chat turned out to be the end of 11 years. The man who actually decided this, not Carol, she just delivers verdicts, she doesn't write them, is named Roger Vance, and he didn't even come down for the conversation. You'll learn later that he watched the security footage of you leaving from his office upstairs, mostly out of idle curiosity, the way you'd glance at weather on your phone. Roger has run Halden Logistics for 6 years, inherited the CEO chair from his father, and has never once, in your entire time there, remembered your name without checking a screen first. Here's the actual reason you got fired, and it's smaller and dumber than you'd expect. The company was quietly hemorrhaging money on a software contract you'd flagged as overpriced and inefficient 2 years earlier, in a memo Roger never read, and when the board finally noticed the bleeding, someone needed to be the visible cost-cutting gesture. You cost $94,000 a year, including benefits. The software vendor's contract, coincidentally, is run by Roger's college roommate. You didn't know that when you got the calendar invite. You know it now, because you spent the drive home doing the kind of quiet, obsessive research people do when they've just been humiliated and have nothing left to lose by finding out exactly why. The first 3 months are just survival, and this is the part most videos skip because it isn't satisfying. You apply to 40 jobs. You hear back from 6. You do a second interview at a company that ends up hiring their internal candidate instead. A courtesy interview you didn't know you were sitting through until it was over. Your savings account, which used to feel comfortable, starts feeling like a countdown. Your wife, Elena, doesn't say anything about it directly, but you notice she stopped mentioning the kitchen renovation she'd been planning, and that silence is somehow louder than if she'd brought it up every day. You take a temp contract in month 2, logistics consulting, 3 days a week, 40% of your old salary. Mostly to stop the bleeding and partly because sitting home applying to jobs that never respond was starting to do something to how you talk to your own kids. Your son asks you once, not unkindly, just curious the way 7-year-olds are curious about everything, why you're home so much now. You tell him you're between things. He accepts this the way kids accept most adult explanations, without pressing, and you go into the bathroom afterward and sit on the edge of the tub for a while before coming back out. Here's a fact worth knowing at this exact point in the story, because it's the actual hinge everything turns on, and almost nobody explains it correctly. Severance packages in the US are not legally required in most states. There's no federal law mandating them, which means the 8 weeks Halden gave you was entirely a courtesy, calculated by HR using a formula most employees never see. Typically 1 to 2 weeks of pay per year of service. You got 11 weeks for 11 years. It felt like generosity at the time. In hindsight, it was the exact minimum required to keep you from talking to a lawyer, and you only learn this later, from a former coworker who left the same year and actually did consult one. The idea starts as a joke, the way most terrible, wonderful ideas do. You're having beers with your old work friend, Marcus, one of maybe 3 people from Halden who still calls you, unprompted, just to check in, and he mentions, almost in passing, that Halden's stock has been quietly cratering. Roger's software gamble didn't pay off. The board is nervous. A private equity firm has been sniffing around for months, looking to buy control cheap and gut the place for parts. You should buy it, Marcus says, laughing, clearly joking. You don't laugh. You go home and you don't sleep, and by 4 a.m. you've pulled every public filing Halden has ever made, and the numbers tell a story Roger clearly doesn't understand about his own company. It's genuinely undervalued, badly mismanaged, and exactly the kind of distressed asset a patient buyer with operational knowledge could turn around. The kind of knowledge you happen to have 11 years of, for free, because you used to work there. You don't tell Elena for 11 days. Not because you're hiding it, but because you don't believe it yourself yet, and saying it out loud to the one person whose opinion actually matters feels like it would make the idea real before you've stress-tested whether it's insane. When you finally do tell her, at the kitchen table, after the kids are asleep, she's quiet for almost a full minute. Long enough that you start explaining yourself again, filling the silence, and then she says, "How much would we have to risk?" And you realize that's not a no. That's the actual question. You spend the rest of the night answering it as honestly as you can, which isn't very, because neither of you actually knows yet. Here's where the story usually jumps straight to the triumphant part, but the actual process took 14 months, and the middle of it is where everything almost fell apart. You need capital you don't have. You approach 3 private equity contacts from your old network, and 2 say no immediately. Too small a deal, too much reputational risk backing a guy who just got laid off from the exact company he's proposing to buy. One of them, a man named Dave you'd known for a decade, doesn't even take the meeting himself, sends an associate instead, which stings more than the actual rejection does. The third, a firm called Ashford Capital, is interested for a different reason than you expected. They don't care about your revenge story at all. They care that you're the only person who's approached them with an actual, detailed operational turnaround plan instead of a pitch deck full of buzzwords. You spend 6 weeks building that plan late at night at your kitchen table, Elena reading drafts over your shoulder, finding the gaps in your logic before an investor could. You fill an entire notebook, the cheap kind, spiral-bound, the same brand you used to take meeting notes in at Halden out of habit, with financials, org charts, a list of exactly which contracts need renegotiating and in what order. Your temp consulting job pays the bills during this stretch, barely, and there are 2 weeks in month 7 where you genuinely consider quitting the whole idea, mostly late at night, mostly after a rejection email, mostly when the math on your own savings account starts looking uncomfortably close to zero again. The negotiation with the board takes another 5 months, most of it excruciating, some of it almost collapsing twice. The first collapse happens when Ashford's due diligence team finds an accounting discrepancy in Halden's inventory reporting that nearly kills the whole deal. 3 weeks of tense calls, forensic accountants, you personally walking Ashford's team through exactly why the discrepancy is a reporting error, not fraud, because you're the only person on either side of the table who actually understands how the old inventory system worked. A system you built the documentation for 7 years earlier, and nobody since has bothered to update. The second near collapse is Roger himself. Hearing rumors of who's behind the bid, he tries to rally a defensive shareholder vote to block it, and briefly succeeds, buying himself 6 more weeks he spends telling anyone who'll listen that the whole thing is a disgruntled ex-employee's ego project, which, if you're honest with yourself in the shower some mornings, isn't entirely wrong. He calls 3 of your old colleagues personally, trying to build a coalition against the sale, and 2 of them call you afterward, uncomfortable, to tell you what he said. But Ashford's money is patient. The board's numbers keep getting worse every quarter Roger delays, and eventually enough shareholders get tired of watching their position bleed value to override his objection. The vote passes by a margin narrow enough that you don't actually exhale until the final count is read aloud. The morning it closes, you do something Roger will remember for the rest of his life, though not the thing you originally imagined. You'd pictured, more than once, some cinematic moment, walking into his office, watching his face fall. It doesn't happen that way. Instead, you get a 2-line email from legal counsel confirming the transaction closed at 9:14 a.m., and you're sitting in your kitchen in the same chair you were sitting in the morning you got fired, and you just sit there for a long time, not celebrating, mostly just breathing. Elena finds you like that 20 minutes later, still in the chair, and doesn't say anything, just sits down across from you and waits until you're ready to talk. The actual conversation with Roger happens 3 days later, and it's almost anticlimactic. You've retained him, technically, per the board's transition agreement. 90 days, advisory capacity, mostly optics, and he comes into what used to be his own office, now technically yours, and he says, tightly, "I assume you're here to gloat." And you tell him the truth, which surprises you as much as it surprises him. You're not. You're here because the software contract with his college roommate is still bleeding the company $340,000 a year, and you need his signature to unwind it before quarter's end. And that's it. That's the whole meeting. No speech. No cardboard box moment in reverse. Just a number on a page that needs fixing, the same number that got you fired in the first place, closing a loop neither of you planned. He signs it without much argument, actually. which surprises you more than anything else that day. On his way out, he pauses at the door and says, without quite looking at you, "For what it's worth, I don't think I ever actually decided you specifically. I think I just decided a number, and you were attached to it." You tell him you know. You've known for 14 months. It doesn't make either of you feel better exactly, but it's the most honest thing either of you has said to the other in the entire time you've known each other. Here's the part that actually complicates the whole story, and it's the part worth sitting with. 2 months in, you have to make your first real personnel decision as the new owner, and it's Carol, the HR woman who delivered your termination, who was never actually the villain of any of this, just the person holding the folder. The restructuring you're implementing, the one that fixes the actual financial problems Roger created, eliminates her role along with 4 others. You sit across from her, in the same conference room where she once sat across from you, and you watch her go through the exact same 3 seconds of disbelief you went through 11 months earlier. She says, quietly, not bitterly, just factually, "This is strange for both of us, isn't it?" You agree that it is. You give her 14 weeks instead of the standard 8, and a genuine reference, and you spend 20 minutes past the scheduled meeting time just talking with her about what actually happened that day 11 months ago. She tells you Roger never even read your personnel file before deciding, just pulled a cost report sorted by salary and picked names off the top. You don't feel triumphant about any of it. You feel exactly as uncomfortable as the actual math of running a real company should make you feel, because it turns out owning the place doesn't exempt you from the same ugly, necessary decisions that once cost you your own job. It just moves you to the other side of the desk. You keep Marcus on, obviously. Promote him, actually, into the operations role you used to hold, and watch him grow into it faster than you expected, occasionally catching yourself giving him the exact advice a mentor once gave you a decade earlier, in this same building, back when none of this seemed remotely possible. A year after the acquisition closes, the company is profitable again for the first time in 3 years, and Marcus, the friend whose joke started all of it, asks you, over beers again, at the same bar, whether it was worth it. You think about it longer than he expects you to. You tell him the honest answer. The money is good, better than good, but it's not actually the thing you think about at 2 a.m. What you think about is the 14 months in between. The version of you that kept building the plan after 2 firms said no, the version that didn't know yet whether any of it would work, the guy doing spreadsheets at his kitchen table at 1 a.m. while his wife slept upstairs, betting everything on the idea that being right about a $340,000 software contract mattered more than the fact that nobody with power had bothered to check his math while he still worked there. You think about Carol, and the 14 weeks, and the conversation that didn't fix anything but at least was honest. You think about your son, still not quite sure what between things turned into, but old enough now to notice that you don't sit on the edge of the tub anymore. Getting fired never was the story. Being unwilling to stop being right about something small, long after anyone was paying attention to you, was. That kitchen table where I built the entire turnaround plan, the actual notebook I filled up during those 6 weeks, cover falling apart now. I still have it, and I finally found where to get the same one. It's linked below if you're building your own plan at your own kitchen table right now.